Ethan Cole was the kind of man who could make the world believe anything. Today the world believed he was happy. The flash of cameras lit up his flawless smile as he stood beneath chandeliers that sparkled like liquid diamonds. Reporters whispered about his billion-dollar tech company, his designer suit, and his fairy tale wedding to Sophie Delgado, the social media darling who'd turned love into a brand. But just beyond the glass walls of the Arlington Grand Hotel, a frail man in a rain-soaked coat watched silently from the shadows, clutching a small wooden box. Why would a homeless man come to a billionaire's wedding? How could two worlds so opposite collide on a day meant for perfection? And what secret could he possibly hold that would stop the music in a single breath? The orchestra played softly as guests sipped gold-flecked champagne. Every detail of the ceremony gleamed, from the imported roses to the marble floors polished so bright they reflected the chandeliers above. Margaret Cole, Ethan's mother, glided through the room with her signature poise, her diamonds catching the light like authority itself. To her, reputation was religion and today was the high mass. "Stand straight," she whispered, brushing invisible dust off Ethan's shoulder. "This family doesn't slouch in public." Ethan smiled, "Perfectly of course. Relax, Mom. It's just a wedding." Her reply was a dagger cloaked in silk. "It's never just a wedding. It's legacy." But as she turned away, her confident stride faltered. Her eyes flicked toward the grand entrance, almost as if she sensed something waiting beyond those gilded doors. Something she'd buried long ago. Outside, rain traced rivers down the glass. The man in the tattered coat pressed a trembling hand against the door, watching Ethan through the reflection. For a moment, their eyes met, two worlds connecting for a heartbeat neither man could name. Ethan blinked, disoriented, but the figure was gone. Inside, Sophie Delgado entered, her gown flowing like silver water. The crowd rose. Gasps filled the hall. She was everything Ethan's life represented: beauty, fame, control. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes caught the faint silhouette outside, and something inside her stirred, pity maybe or recognition. Ethan's heart should have raced, but it didn't. It simply echoed the same emptiness he'd built his success on. The vows began. The applause swelled. The illusion was complete. But perfection, no matter how well crafted, always trembles before it breaks. And break it did. The ballroom doors creaked open. The music stopped. Gasps sliced through the silence. A drenched old man stumbled in, leaving muddy footprints on the pristine white marble. His beard was gray, his coat tattered, but his voice, soft and steady, carried like thunder. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, holding the wooden box to his chest. "But the groom is my son." For one heartbeat, no one moved. Margaret's face drained of color. Sophie's bouquet slipped from her hands. Ethan's smile cracked for the first time in years. The perfect day had just become the reckoning. Thomas Cole once lived in the kind of house people slowed their cars to admire, a mansion with marble pillars, a silver gate, and laughter echoing through endless hallways. But the walls that gleamed with wealth hid cracks that even gold couldn't fill. Thomas had built his empire on software and sacrifice, on all-nighters and missed birthdays. He had given the world innovation, but in the process he lost his own world piece by piece. Long before he became the homeless man, Thomas had been a visionary, bold, admired, envied. He was the man journalists called the mind behind the Cole fortune. But success breeds hunger, and hunger, when shared with the wrong partner, breeds ruin. That partner was Margaret, beautiful, brilliant, and relentless. Together, they were unstoppable, until ambition demanded a sacrifice neither was ready to pay. It began the night Margaret discovered that Thomas had secretly diverted millions into an orphanage project in Nairobi. "Charity doesn't build empires," she'd spat, her diamond necklace glinting like ice. "It drains them." Thomas had smiled, weary. "Empires mean nothing if you forget what it means to be human." But Margaret wasn't moved. The next morning she filed the paperwork that would quietly erase him, selling shares behind his back, feeding the media rumors of fraud, and sealing his fall from grace. By the time he realized what she'd done, the empire was gone, and so was she, taking their young son Ethan with her. Years later, Margaret told Ethan that his father had abandoned them, that he'd chosen greed over family. Ethan grew up idolizing his mother and resenting the ghost of the man he never knew. He built his own fortune from the ruins of his father's name, and in doing so became everything Thomas had once warned him not to be. But Thomas never stopped watching. From a distance, he followed every headline, every press conference, every staged smile. He saw the coldness in Ethan's eyes, the same emptiness that had once haunted his own reflection. He longed to reach out, to explain, but pride and shame chained him to silence. So he wandered. Years passed. The empire's founder became a ghost sleeping beneath bridges, clutching a wooden box, the last relic of the life he'd lost. Inside lay two things: a rusted ring he once wore when he built his company from nothing, and a letter he'd rewritten 100 times but never sent. The rain that morning felt colder than usual as Thomas approached the Arlington Grand Hotel. He hadn't planned to enter, only to see Ethan from afar, perhaps whisper a silent blessing. But fate rarely asks permission. Through the glass, he saw Ethan's practiced grin, the same smile he'd once taught his son as a child in their garden, before money corrupted meaning. The sight broke him. He clutched the wooden box tighter. "Just one moment," he whispered to no one. "Just one truth before I die." And with that, the father who had once ruled empires took his first step toward the door that would shatter them again. Thomas Cole hadn't stepped into a place like this in over 2 decades. The scent of white lilies, the hum of polite laughter, the glint of champagne against crystal, it all felt like a dream he'd woken up too late to return to. But dreams fade and truth waits. His shoes, soaked from the rain, squeaked against the marble floor as he took his first step inside the Arlington Grand Hotel's grand ballroom. Every head turned. For a moment, time froze. Guests stared in disbelief, some with pity, others with disgust. Thomas looked nothing like the kind of man who belonged here. His coat was torn, his beard unkempt, and his trembling hands clutched a weathered wooden box to his chest. But his eyes burned with a quiet strength that unsettled even the boldest onlookers. A waiter tried to block his path. "Sir, this is a private." Thomas raised a hand. "I know." His voice, though soft, carried through the room like an echo. "But I need just 1 minute. Please." Sophie's smile faltered first. Something about the man struck a chord she couldn't name. But before she could speak, the whispers began. "Who let him in? Is he lost? Security." Margaret's pearls rattled against her throat as her pulse quickened. She knew that voice. The years hadn't erased it. They'd only buried it beneath layers of guilt and diamonds. "Get him out of here," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut through the music. But Thomas didn't flinch. He turned slowly toward her, rain dripping from his hair. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, the empire's fallen king and its self-crowned queen. The years between them vanished, leaving only the truth. Ethan's confusion deepened. He looked from the stranger to his mother, from his mother to Sophie, then back again. "What's going on?" he demanded. Thomas's lips trembled. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he said. "I came to tell you the truth." "Sir, please," Ethan began, trying to maintain control, but Thomas took one more step forward. "I'm not here for money. I'm not here for pity. I am here," he said, voice breaking, "because the man you call a stranger is your father." The words hit the room like a detonation. The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered, echoing through the stunned silence. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan's expression twisted between disbelief and fury. What kind of sick joke is this? But Margaret's trembling confirmed what no one dared to say. Her silence was louder than truth. Reporters, scenting scandal, lifted their cameras. Flashbulbs ignited. Thomas opened the box and revealed the rusted ring. "This was yours once," he whispered. "You gave it to me when you were 5. Ethan's breath hitched. The ring. He remembered it, vaguely, buried beneath years of denial. Security hesitated, uncertain whether to throw the man out or listen. The orchestra remained silent. And just like that, the illusion of perfection, crafted, polished, and sold to the world, crumbled into dust before everyone's eye. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The chandeliers flickered slightly, as if even the light was unsure whether to stay or flee. Then Margaret found her voice, sharp, trembling, desperate. "Security? Remove this man, now." But the guards hesitated. The air had changed. Something about the way Ethan stared at the stranger made even the professionals freeze in place. "Wait," Ethan said, his voice low. "I want to hear what he has to say." Thomas's chest rose and fell. The years of silence had been heavier than any prison sentence, but now the words came like floodwater. "Ethan," he began, "I never left you. I was pushed out, erased, by someone who wanted to rewrite the truth." Margaret stiffened. "Lies." Thomas turned toward her slowly. "You told our son I abandoned you both. You told him I was a thief. But tell them, Margaret, who really signed the contracts that stripped me of everything?" Gasps rippled through the guests. The scandal was no longer rumor, it was living, breathing, collapsing in front of them. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mother, what is he talking about?" Margaret's composure wavered. For years she'd commanded boardrooms and social circles with flawless grace. But this was a battlefield she couldn't control. Your father was reckless. He gave everything away to strangers. He would have destroyed us. Thomas shook his head, his voice quiet but cutting. No, Margaret. I tried to save us. But greed doesn't build families, it burns them. The words struck like a match to gasoline. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. Every childhood memory flashed before him. His mother's stories of betrayal, her bitterness, her constant warnings never to be weak like his father. But now he wasn't sure who the real villain was. Why now? Ethan demanded, his voice cracking. Why come here? After all these years, after everything? Thomas looked at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. Because I saw who you were becoming. I saw me, before I lost everything that mattered. Sophie stepped forward gently. Ethan, maybe you should. But Ethan raised a trembling hand to silence her. His world was spinning. Everything he believed, everything he built, was suddenly fragile. I buried you, he whispered. I mourned you. Thomas smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried a lifetime of pain. Then let this be my resurrection. The crowd murmured, half horrified, half mesmerized. Margaret tried to step forward, but Sophie caught her wrist, her voice low but sharp. If he's lying, why are you afraid to let him speak? Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Her silence was confession enough. Thomas reached out, his weathered hand trembling. I don't want your money, Ethan. I just want a moment of truth between us. No press. No mask. Just father and son. For the first time, Ethan didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a boy who just realized his whole life had been a well-dressed lie. And in that moment, surrounded by glitter and judgment, the man everyone thought was beneath him became the only one brave enough to stand in the light. The ballroom had descended into chaos. Guests whispered, cameras flashed, and social media buzzed like a swarm of hungry wasps. But upstairs, behind a locked door in one of the Arlington Grand Hotel's private suites, silence reigned again, the kind of silence that holds too much truth to breathe. Ethan sat stiffly in a velvet armchair, staring at the man across from him. Thomas looked smaller up close, his face weathered by years of hardship, his hands shaking slightly as they rested on the wooden box. Sophie stood beside Ethan, torn between loyalty and compassion, while Margaret lingered near the door, her back straight, her mask cracking with every second that passed. Talk, Ethan said finally, his tone brittle. You said you didn't abandon us. Then tell me, where were you? Thomas took a slow breath. When your mother betrayed me, I thought I could rebuild. I went to every investor, every friend. But none wanted to hear the truth. Margaret had already fed them her version of it, that I was unstable, dangerous. She made sure the door to my own company closed in my face. Margaret turned sharply. You were reckless with money. You threw it away. But it wasn't money I cared about, Thomas replied, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. It was legacy. Humanity. The same things I see dying in you, Ethan. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't like the reflection being drawn for him. Thomas continued, eyes distant. I lost everything. The bank took the house. The company was renamed. I tried to find you, Ethan. I wrote letters. Hundreds of them. But they came back unopened. Then one day I saw a photo of you, all grown up, shaking hands with the same men who once cheered when I fell. That's when I knew I'd lost you too. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. He's telling the truth, isn't he? She whispered. Margaret said nothing. Her silence was louder than denial. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out one of the letters, worn, rain-stained, torn at the edges. I carried this one for years, he said softly. It's the only one I couldn't bear to throw away. Ethan took it, his hands trembling. The handwriting was faint, but the words were clear enough to pierce him. My son, if you ever forget who you are, look in the mirror and remember whose heart beats inside you. Ethan's voice broke. Why didn't you come sooner? Thomas looked at him, eyes full of quiet sorrow. I did. But every time I saw your mother's eyes in you, and I knew you weren't ready to see mine. Sophie's breath caught. She looked at Margaret, disgust and pity warring in her expression. How could you? Margaret straightened, her mask reforming. I did what I had to. I built us a life. Thomas shook his head. No, Margaret. You built a cage and called it success. Ethan turned away, unable to speak. For the first time, the empire he'd built on pride felt like dust in his hands. By morning, the wedding of the decade had become the scandal of the year. News vans lined the street outside the Arlington Grand Hotel like vultures waiting for a carcass. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Homeless man crashes billionaire wedding, claims to be groom's father. Social media was merciless. Memes, think pieces, gossip columns. Everyone had a theory, but no one had the truth. Some called Thomas a fraud. Others hailed him as a symbol of humility in a world obsessed with status. Either way, Ethan Cole's empire of perfection had cracked, and the world wanted to watch it burn. Inside the hotel's penthouse suite, Ethan paced like a caged animal. His phone buzzed endlessly, investors withdrawing, PR teams panicking, brand deals evaporating one by one. The empire he'd spent 10 years building was collapsing in a single night. Sophie sat by the window, scrolling through the chaos. "They're saying your father staged it," she whispered. "That it was all a stunt to make you look human." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Human? That's the one thing I've spent my whole life pretending to be." Margaret, seated at the vanity, clutched her pearls so tightly her knuckles turned white. "We can fix this," she muttered. "We'll issue a statement. Deny everything. People forget. They always do." Thomas stood quietly in the corner, watching the empire that once bore his name collapse under its own vanity. "You can't fix truth, Margaret," he said. "You can only face it." But no one wanted to hear that. Sophie turned from the window, her voice trembling. "Do you even care about what's happening to him?" she asked Margaret. Margaret glared. "That man chose his fate." "No," Sophie shot back. "You chose it for him, and now your son's paying the price." Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "Enough." He looked from his mother to his father, eyes hollow. "You two destroyed each other. But I'm the one standing in the wreckage." Thomas's voice softened. "Then rebuild, not from pride but from truth." Ethan wanted to scream, but the words caught in his throat. His entire identity, the brand, the success, the control, had been built on lies. Without them, who was he? Outside, reporters shouted his name. The sound of camera shutters felt like gunfire. Sophie stood and walked toward Thomas. "You said you came here for truth," she said quietly. "Now that it's out, what will you do?" Thomas smiled sadly. "What I should have done long ago, help others rise even if I can't." He turned to Ethan one last time. "The world may mock me, son, but remember, a man isn't defined by what he owns, but by what he stands for when everything is gone." Then he walked out, past the guards, through the crowd, and into the cold morning rain, leaving behind the empire that had once been his, now crumbling in silence. Ethan watched him go, torn between fury and heartbreak. The vows had been spoken. The cameras had captured every word. But in the ruins of what was meant to be forever, something deeper had been born. Shame, yes, but also the first flicker of awakening. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the streets still glistened like cracked mirrors. Ethan walked without direction, his designer shoes ruined, his tailored jacket clinging to him in the chill. For the first time in his life, no one followed, no cameras flashed, and no one cared who he was. He found himself in the part of the city he'd always driven past without seeing, alleys lined with steam vents, flickering streetlights, and faces that told stories wealth could never buy. A small cardboard sign caught his eye, "Second Chance's Shelter." He hesitated at the doorway. Inside, a handful of people huddled around a pot of soup, sharing quiet laughter. And there, at a corner table beneath a flickering bulb, sat Thomas. His father, his stranger, his mirror. Ethan froze. For a moment he considered walking away. But something in him, perhaps the echo of that little boy who once gave his father a ring, pushed him forward. Thomas looked up, his eyes tired but warm. "You found me," he said softly. Ethan exhaled, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "The world thinks I'm a fraud. They think you're insane." Thomas smiled faintly. "The world thinks too much and feels too little." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat. The silence between them was thick but not hostile, just heavy with all the years they'd lost. "I don't know who to believe anymore," Ethan admitted. "Mother built me. Disappeared. And now I'm supposed to know which part of my life was real." Thomas leaned forward. "Everything was real, Ethan. Even the lies. They shaped you, but they don't have to define you." Ethan looked down, ashamed. "I treated you like a criminal. But I once treated my soul the same way," Thomas replied. "Until I learned that losing everything isn't the end, it's the beginning of who you really are." Outside, the wind howled through the city's skeleton towers. Inside, the silence softened. Thomas reached into his coat and slid the rusted ring across the table. The metal caught the faint light like a heartbeat rediscovered. "You gave me this," he said quietly. "It reminded me of home when I had none. I think it's time it came back to you." Ethan stared at it, that small, forgotten relic from his childhood. He picked it up slowly, his reflection distorted in the scratched metal. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "No one deserves redemption," Thomas said. "But everyone needs it." Ethan closed his hand around the ring, feeling its weight, not of gold but of memory. He looked up, tears burning in his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this." Thomas smiled gently. "Start with truth. The rest will follow." For the first time, Ethan felt something deeper than success. He felt peace. Fragile, foreign, but real. As dawn broke through the city haze, father and son sat together in silence. Two broken men, sharing one quiet promise: to begin again. 3 months later, the world had moved on, but Ethan hadn't. The scandal had cost him everything: investors, reputation, the company's gleaming headquarters that once bore his initials. But in losing it all, he'd found something priceless: silence. And in that silence, a new kind of wealth had begun to grow. The Second Chance's shelter had changed since that night. What was once a cracked old building now pulsed with quiet purpose. Volunteers came daily, some from the same boardrooms that once mocked Thomas's fall. Ethan, no longer in tailored suits but rolled up sleeves, spent his mornings serving food and his nights listening to stories far more powerful than profit margins. Lena, the bridesmaid who had once whispered warnings that no one heard, joined him too. She ran workshops for displaced women, teaching them to rebuild confidence and find their voices again. She smiled differently now, not the polite smile of social niceties, but one born of knowing what truly mattered. And Sophie? She came often but never stayed long. The marriage hadn't survived the scandal, but there was no bitterness, only quiet understanding. "We were built on a lie," she once told him. But maybe that lie led us both to something real. Sometimes Ethan still caught himself watching the door, waiting for his father to walk through. Thomas hadn't returned since that night, though his presence lingered everywhere, in the laughter of the shelter's children, in the humility that softened Ethan's once proud eyes, and in the whispers of those who spoke of the man who gave up millions to serve strangers. One afternoon, Lena approached Ethan as he repaired a broken window. "There's talk," she said, "about rebuilding the foundation your father started before everything. A trust fund to support shelters across the state. People want your name on it." Ethan smiled faintly. "They can have the trust. But not my name. Let it stand for the people it serves, not the man who lost his way." Lena nodded. "You've changed." He paused, looking out at the street, the same street he once looked down upon from penthouse windows. "Maybe. But I'm still learning what that means." As evening fell, the shelter filled with light, laughter, conversation, warmth. Ethan helped a young boy tie his shoelaces and felt something he hadn't in years: peace that didn't depend on applause. Then, just as he was about to close for the night, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, familiar, haunting. Read: "Ethan, some truths can't stay buried forever. When the world is quiet, come find me where it all began. Father." Ethan's heart pounded. "Where it all began?" he whispered. Lena looked at him, concerned. "What is it?" But Ethan said nothing. He simply slipped the letter into his pocket, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. The world had forgiven him. But forgiveness, he realized, was only the beginning of truth. The next morning, Ethan drove for hours through mist-covered highways, the letter sitting on the dashboard like a ghostly compass. The address written beneath his father's words was one he hadn't seen in decades: 112 Brookfield Lane. His childhood home. The estate had once been magnificent: rolling lawns, marble fountains, and glass walls that shimmered like pride itself. But now the driveway was overgrown, the windows boarded, the gates rusted with time. Nature had reclaimed what greed had abandoned. He stepped through the gates, his heart heavy with memories. Every corner whispered pieces of the boy he once was, the laughter echoing through empty halls, the nights he waited for his father to come home, the silence his mother left in her wake. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rain. Faded portraits lined the walls, one of them, a younger Thomas, standing beside Margaret, both wearing the same hollow smiles that had fooled the world. He found another letter sitting on the grand piano. The handwriting trembled slightly as though written in haste. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But before you curse fate, know this: the truth was never about money or revenge. It was about you. Go to the cellar. What you find there will tell you everything. Father." Ethan's pulse quickened. He moved through the house until he found the cellar door, locked but fragile. He forced it open and the smell of damp air rushed out. A single bulb flickered overhead, illuminating a small wooden chest in the center of the room. It looked like it had been waiting, patiently, deliberately. Inside the chest were dozens of photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. Ethan picked one up, a photo of a much younger Thomas, standing with a woman who wasn't Margaret, holding a baby in his arms. The caption on the back read, "Thomas and Emily, their son Ethan, 1993. Ethan froze. Emily? Another photo fell to the floor. Margaret, standing beside a lawyer, signing papers labeled, "Adoption and Name Change Agreement." His breath caught. The letters, the disappearances, the tension, it all made sense now. Margaret hadn't just stolen Thomas's company. She had stolen his son. Ethan sank to his knees, the weight of revelation crushing him. He wasn't Margaret's by blood. He was Thomas's from another life, a child of love, taken by power. And Margaret had lied about everything. He stumbled backward, clutching the letter. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Father?" he whispered. But the silence answered for him. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Ethan looked up, eyes burning, and whispered to the empty house, "If this is where it began, then this is where I'll finish it." As he turned to leave, a faint light blinked on in the corner, an old security monitor. And on it the timestamp flickered live. Someone else was watching. The flickering light on the monitor held Ethan's gaze. For a moment he thought it was just an echo, some malfunction of an old security system. But the timestamp blinked current, and the faint shape of a man appeared in the frame. Thomas. Alive. Ethan's pulse surged. He rushed outside, through the rain-soaked garden, toward the small caretaker's cottage at the edge of the property, the source of the live feed. The door was ajar, the air thick with damp wood and silence. "Father?" he called, his voice trembling. A weak cough answered from within. There, in an armchair by the fire, sat Thomas, older, thinner, but unmistakably alive. His eyes met Ethan's with weary warmth. "You found it," Thomas whispered. Ethan fell to his knees beside him. "You're alive. I thought." "I am," Thomas interrupted gently, "but not for long." Ethan's chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" Thomas smiled faintly. "Cancer. Stage 4. I didn't tell you because this story was never about me surviving. It was about you becoming." Ethan shook his head. "No. You can't just." Thomas reached out and took his son's hand, his touch frail but steady. "You needed to see everything, Ethan, the company, the lies, the past, not to punish you but to free you. Margaret didn't just take you from me. She took your truth. But you have it back now." Ethan's voice cracked. "She made me hate you." "And you did," Thomas said softly. "But hate is easy. Understanding, that's harder. And that's where love begins again." They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. Then Thomas gestured toward the table beside him. A small folder lay there, marked "The Cole Foundation Trust." "I rebuilt it," Thomas said. "Not for business but for people. Shelters, education, dignity, the wealth that doesn't fade. You're its heir now. Carry it forward." Ethan opened the folder, but inside, beneath the papers, was something else, a certificate of birth. His eyes widened. It wasn't just his name. It was another, a twin. Ethan and Daniel Cole, born to Thomas and Emily Cole. He looked up, stunned. There was another child? Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes. Margaret found out about Emily's second pregnancy, and she couldn't bear to share you both. Daniel was taken, hidden. I searched for him, but by the time I found a trace, he was gone." Ethan's heart pounded. "Gone? Where?" Thomas looked at him with tired eyes. "The streets, son. The shelter. The man who helped me rebuild it after I fell, the one you worked beside for months, that was him." Ethan's breath caught. Liam, the quiet, humble man at the shelter, always kind, always distant, the one who'd reminded him of himself in strange, unspoken ways. "He's your brother," Thomas whispered. "The one who never had your wealth, but never lost his soul." The room spun. Every memory, every word Liam had spoken, hit Ethan like lightning. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan demanded. Thomas smiled faintly. "Because you weren't ready to see what family really means until you lost everything pretending to have it." A heavy silence filled the room. Ethan held his father's hand as Thomas's breath grew shallow. "Promise me one thing," Thomas murmured. "Find him. Tell him the truth. And make sure the Cole name finally stands for compassion, not control." Ethan nodded, tears falling freely. "I promise." Thomas's last words were almost a whisper, "Then I can rest." The fire flickered once, then dimmed. Outside, dawn broke over the ruined mansion, bathing the estate in gold. Ethan stood alone, the folder pressed to his chest, the legacy of two fathers, one lost to greed, one found through grace. He looked toward the horizon, where the city skyline rose, where the shelter stood, and where Liam, his brother, waited unknowingly for the truth. The world would remember the scandal, the fall, the twist. But Ethan would remember something else. That family isn't who you're born to, but who you choose to become when the truth finally sets you free.